Hey everyone! Today we're diving deep into building a complete authentication system in Flutter using Go Router and Bloc with clean architecture. And by the end of this tutorial, you'll have a production-ready solution that you can actually use in your apps. So let's jump right in. Now we need to add all the packages we'll be using. I'm opening up the pubspec.yaml file and let's start adding our dependencies. First up, Go Router. This is our navigation powerhouse that's going to handle all our routing needs. Next, I'm adding Flutter Bloc. This is our state management solution that'll keep everything organized and predictable. We'll also need Equatable for comparing states. This is super helpful for making our code cleaner. Adding darts next, this gives us functional programming superpowers and makes error handling so much more elegant. Now, SharedPreferences for storing our authentication token locally. And finally, GetIt for dependency injection. This is what makes our code testable and maintainable. Alright, now comes the fun part, setting up our folder structure according to clean architecture. This might seem like overkill at first, but trust me, this structure is going to save you so much headache as your project grows. Opening up the lib folder, and let's start creating our structure. First, I'm creating a core folder. This is where all our shared components will live. Inside core, I'm creating an error folder for error handling, then a network folder for network abstractions, and a use cases folder for our base use case classes. Great! Now I'm creating a features folder. This is where all our features will live. Each feature is self-contained, which is beautiful for maintainability. Inside features, I'm creating an auth folder for our authentication feature. Now, inside auth, we're going to create 3 layers following clean architecture principles. Data. This is our data layer where we handle all data operations. Domain. This is where our business logic lives, completely independent of frameworks. Presentation. This is our UI and state management layer. Let's go into the domain folder and create 3 more folders. Entities. Our pure business objects. Repositories. Just contracts, not implementations. Use cases. Each representing one specific action. Now the data folder. Creating data sources, remote API, local storage, etc. Models, data models that extend our entities. Repositories, the actual implementations of our repository contracts. And finally, the presentation folder. Creating block, our block files. Pages, our screen widgets. Widgets, reusable UI components. Awesome! I know this looks like a lot of folders, but here's the thing. Every single folder has a clear, specific responsibility. This is what makes large projects manageable. Let's start with the core layer. Opening up the error folder and creating failures.dart. I'm creating an abstract failure class. This is our base class for all errors in the app. It extends Equatable so we can compare failures easily. Overriding the props getter to return an empty list. Child classes can override this with their own properties. Now, let's create our concrete failure types. First, server failure, for when something goes wrong on the server side. Second, cache failure, for local storage issues. Third, invalid credentials failure, specifically for wrong username/password situations. Saving that file. Perfect. Now, creating exceptions.dart in the same folder. These are the exceptions we'll throw at the data layer, which will then be converted to failures. Server exception. Thrown when API calls fail. Cache exception. Thrown when local storage operations fail. Invalid credentials exception. Thrown when login credentials are wrong. Now, let's move to the use cases folder in core and create usecase.dart. I'm creating an abstract generic use case class. This is the foundation for all our use cases. It's generic with two types: type for the return value and params for the parameters. The call method returns a future with either a failure on the left or our success result on the right. This is that functional programming goodness from the Darts package. I'm also adding a noParams class for use cases that don't need any parameters. Now, let's dive into the domain layer of our auth feature. Opening up the Entities folder and creating user_entity.dart. Creating our user class, and here's what's important. This is a pure business entity. No JSON, no database stuff, no framework dependencies. Just pure data. It has three properties: ID, email, and name. All fields are final and required. Overriding props for object comparison. Now creating our repository interface. Opening the repositories folder and creating auth_repository.dart. I'm creating an abstract auth repository class. This is our contract. Notice we're not implementing anything here, just defining what operations are possible. For methods login, takes email and password, returns either a failure or a user. Logout, signs the user out. GetCurrentUser, retrieves the current user if they're logged in. Is authenticated, checks if someone is currently authenticated. This separation between interface and implementation is key for testing and flexibility. Time to create our use cases. Opening the use cases folder and creating login_usecase.dart. This use case handles the login action. It receives the repository through the constructor. Dependency injection in action. The call method simply delegates to the repository. Now I'm creating the login params class, just a simple data container for email and password. Moving on, creating logout_usecase.dart. Same pattern, but this one takes no params since logging out doesn't need any input. Creating getCurrentUserUseCase.dart. This one returns a nullable user and also takes no params. And the last one, checkAuth.useCase.dart, returns a bool and takes no params. Simple and clean. Alright, moving to the data layer. Starting with models. Opening the models folder and creating user_model.dart. Our user model extends user entity and calls the parent constructor with all the fields. Adding a FromJSON factory constructor for deserialization, takes a map, extracts the fields with type casting, and a TOJSON method for serialization, returns a map with all our data. Now creating our data sources. Opening the data sources folder and creating auth_local_datasource.dart. First, the abstract class defining the contract, what operations our local storage needs to support. Cache token. Get cached token. Clear all auth data. Cache user. Get cached user. Now the implementation. This class takes SharedPreferences through the constructor. I'm declaring constants for our storage keys. Always use constants to avoid typos. Implementing all the methods cache token. Saves the token to SharedPreferences using our key constant. Cache user serializes our user model to JSON and stores it as a string. Get cached user retrieves the JSON string, deserializes it back to a user model, returns null if there's no data. Data layer, remote data source. First, the interface with two methods. login, and logout. Now, the implementation. For this demo, we're using a mock, but in a real app, you'd replace this with actual API calls. Login simulates a 1-second network delay, checks if email is test@test.com and password is 123456. If they match, returns a mock user. Otherwise, throws invalid credentials exception. Logout just simulates a network delay. In production, you'd call your API to invalidate the token. Now for the repository implementation. Opening the repositories folder and creating auth_repository_impl.dart. Our repository takes both data sources through the constructor. Separation of concerns in action. Implementing login. Call the remote data source to login. If successful, cache both the token and user locally. Return write with the user. Catch specific exceptions and convert them to appropriate failures. Invalid credentials. Exception becomes invalid credentials failure. Server exception becomes server failure. Any other exception also becomes server failure. Implementing logout. Call remote logout. Clear local data. Return write with unit. On error, return server failure. Implementing get current user. Get user from local storage. On error, return cache failure. And is authenticated. Check if token exists in local storage. Return true if it does, false otherwise. Simple but effective. Data layer complete. Time for the presentation layer. Starting with block. Opening the block folder and creating auth_event.dart. Creating our abstract auth event base class extends equatable for comparison. Now the concrete events auth check requested, triggered when the app starts to check if user is already logged in. Auth login requested, triggered when user tries to log in, carries email and password. Auth logout requested, triggered when user wants to log out. Creating auth state.dart now. Now our concrete states: auth initial, the starting state; auth loading, shown when we're processing something; auth authenticated, user is logged in, contains the user object; auth unauthenticated, user is not logged in; auth error, something went wrong, contains an error message. Now for the block itself. Creating auth block.dart. Our auth block extends block with auth event and auth state types. It takes all our use cases through the constructor. Initial state is auth initial. Registering event handlers for each event type. Implementing the check authentication handler. First, emit auth loading to show we're working. Call checkauth use case with no params. Get the either result. Using fold, it takes 2 callbacks, one for failure left and one for success right. If failure, emit auth unauthenticated. If success in user is authenticated, call get current user use case. Fold again. If error or user is null, emit auth unauthenticated. Otherwise, emit auth authenticated with the user. Implementing the login handler. Emit auth loading. Call login use case with params from the event. Fold the result. If failure, determine the type and create an appropriate error message, then emit auth error. If success, emit auth authenticated with the user. Implementing the logout handler. Emit auth loading. Call logout use case. Fold. If error, emit auth error. If success, emit auth unauthenticated. Block is done. Now let's set up our dependency injection. Creating injection container.dart in the root of lib. Creating our global GetIt instance. This is our service locator. Creating the initialization function. Using register factory for the block. We want a fresh instance every time. Passing in the use cases using SL, they'll be automatically resolved. Registering use cases with register lazy singleton, created once when first requested. Each use case gets the repository through SL. Registering the repository, lazy singleton with auth repository type, implementation is auth repository, MPL. Gets both data sources automatically. Registering data sources. Remote doesn't need dependencies. Local gets shared preferences. Registering external dependencies. Getting shared preferences instance asynchronously, then registering it as a singleton. Our init function is ready. Now for the exciting part, setting up Go Router with authentication. Creating router.dart in lib. Creating our AppRouter class. It takes auth block through the constructor because we need to listen to authentication state changes. Creating the router configuration method. Initial location dash starting root is /splash. Refresh listenable. Binding to auth block's stream so the router updates whenever auth state changes. Redirect. This is our guard function, called on every navigation. Getting current auth state. Checking where the user is trying to go. If state is initial or loading, show splash. Return null if already on splash, otherwise redirect to /splash. If user is unauthenticated or in error state, redirect to login. Return null if already on login. If user is authenticated and trying to access login or splash, redirect to home. In all other cases, continue navigation without redirect. Defining our routes. First route, splash screen, just shows a loading page. Login route. I know the IDE is complaining that we haven't created the screens yet, but don't worry, we'll create them in just a moment. Home route, our main app screen after login. Now creating a helper class to make the router reactive. In older versions of GoRouter this was included, but now we need to create it separately. The class extends change notifier, takes a stream in the constructor, calls notify listeners immediately, subscribes to the stream, on each event calls notify listeners, which forces the router to recalculate redirects. Router is ready. Time to create our UI, starting with Splash. Creating a state widget. In init state, getting the auth block via context.read and adding the auth check requested event. This kicks off the authentication check. The build method returns a scaffold with a centered loading indicator. Simple and effective. Now creating the login page. Another state widget. Creating a global key for the form and controllers for our text fields. In Dispose, releasing the controllers, super important to prevent memory leaks. Creating the handle login method, validates the form using our form key. If valid, gets the auth block and adds auth login requested event with email and password from controllers. Using trim on email to remove any white space. Starting the build method, scaffold with an app bar. Using block consumer. This combines block listener and block builder in one widget, super convenient. In the listener, checking for auth error state, If found, show a red snack bar with the error message. The builder returns our UI. Checking is loading, true if state is auth loading. Padding of 24 pixels on all sides. Form with our key. Column with center alignment and full width. Block icon sized 80, blue color. Sized box for spacing. Email text form field. Controller is email controller. Enabled depends on is loading. We disable it while loading. Keyboard type is email address for the right keyboard. Decoration with label, border, and icon. Validator checks that it's not empty and contains an @ symbol. 16 pixel spacing. Password text form field. Obscure text hides the characters. Validator checks it's not empty and at least 6 characters. 24 pixel spacing. Login elevated button. On pressed is null if loading, which disables it. Otherwise calls handle login. Vertical padding of 16. Child. If loading, show a small white circular progress indicator. Otherwise show login text. Login page complete. Creating the home page. This one's a stateless widget since it doesn't need local state. Scaffold with app bar. In Actions, adding an icon button with logout icon. On pressed adds auth logout requested event to the block. Block builder listens to state. If auth authenticated, show a column centered with a green checkmark icon sized 100, bold welcome text size 28, then the user's email and name from state.user. If not, auth authenticated, show a loading indicator. Pages are done. Final touch. Setting up main.dart. Opening lib/main.dart and completely rewriting it. Main function is async. We need a wait. Ensure initialized initializes Flutter binding. Calling our init function to set up all dependencies. This is critical to do before run app. Running the app with my app. My app is a stateless widget. Block provider at the top level. Creating auth block from our service locator. Child is a builder so we can access the context with the block. Getting auth block using context.read. Creating app router passing the auth block. Material app.router for GoRouter. Setting the title, router config gets our router. Debug show checked mode banner false removes that debug banner. Let's run this thing. See that? Splash screen appears. Checking authentication. We're redirected to login because we're not authenticated. Let me enter the test credentials. Clicking Login. See the loading indicator on the button, simulating that network request. Success! We're automatically redirected to the home page. Look at that. We see the welcome message, email, and username. Clicking the Logout button. Loading indicator appears. And boom! Redirected back to login. Let me try wrong credentials. Error. See that red snack bar with invalid email or password. All the source code will be in the description. If you found this helpful, smash that like button and subscribe to the channel for more Flutter content. See you in the next one.